So this is, the battle all goes back to the Bible. That doesn't mean Israel's always right in this, okay, at all. It doesn't, but it also doesn't mean that they should be rendered extinct either. But ultimately, there's always been this, yes, we stand by Israel, America does, because everybody else, well, at least in the Middle East, not all of the Middle East now, but there was a time where all of them wanted them annihilated, okay? And so there's a lot of history here, right? Because it does go back to Exodus. It goes back to, the land where Jesus was crucified. He was in Samaria, he was in Judea, and they call that the West Bank now. So, and then you have your Phoenicians, that's not called that. I don't think it's called that anymore. That's where your Phoenicians came I think they worshipped Baal. Anyway, so that's going way back. Here's the problem I see, and I'm not an expert. I'm just my opinion, possibly, is that to me, the New Testament was closing out the Old. The Old Testament is full of wars. It's full of wars. It's full of land grabs. It's full of murdering people, basically because God wanted the people that were eating babies, because they did. They sacrificed and ate them. Greeks, I'm just saying that's what they worship. That's the reason why the whole Old Testament is wanting to keep the people away from the false gods, because they would fall into that culture. Even if they tried to mingle, they would automatically fall. It talks about it in the Bible. So the Old Testament was a lot, it's very hard for people to read and to understand, and that people think God is such a mean God. No, he's really trying to be a parent to an entire nation and build the nation at the same time. And when people keep doing the same thing over and over again, it's lucky the patience of God. But anyway, but to me, the New Testament closed out the Old. It didn't mean that the things in the Old we weren't supposed to take from, like the Ten Commandments. But as far as just going to, Jesus showed, no, we're not doing land grabs anymore. We're not, Jesus's life was very much about not attaching to this place. He outright said it, do not conform to this world. Okay, because if you conform to it, then you're going to say, no, this is my area, that's your area, okay? Which we do that. We all do that, okay? We're very protective of our country, right? But again, if you believe in the Bible, and this is only for people that believe in the Bible. If you don't, then you'll just laugh it off and think, who am I? But and who am I? I'm just anybody else, right? But because the New Testament closes out the Old, and the Jews just believe in the Old Testament, it's always been my opinion that probably wouldn't sit very well with God. That's just my opinion, though. Because it's basically setting them aside and saying they don't have to follow what Jesus' teachings were when Jesus was God incarnate. That's what Jesus was. The Jews just didn't want to recognize it. The leaders of the church Jews. The disciples Jews, no, they knew who Jesus was. That's, again, it all goes back to why Jesus didn't go to the church leaders, didn't go to the Roman government, didn't go to any experts. He went to the everyday people. Yeah, big deal. It's a really big deal. It's a really big deal. Because, again, just like back then, because Jesus mocked to the disciples, he mocked the leaders of the church, the Jewish church. He did. Look at their robes. Look at their sashes and hats. Look at how they carry on in the marketplace. Like they think they're so, everything. Okay, so there's a lot of different religions that do that. That's why I can't stand religion. But there's a lot of that goes on, okay? So if you're just following the Old Testament and you want to say, yeah, I'm just going to disregard the New Testament, then I would expect that you're going to be in a lot of wars with people. And if you get grandiose and thinking, no, God gave me this land, then, and you might not be, Jesus may not look kindly on it. That's just my opinion, though. That doesn't mean I don't stand with Israel. I don't stand with any nation that wants to annihilate or extinct an entire population of people. So that brings in the historic here. So this is Yasser Arafat, okay? So he was like, let me tell you about him. I remember him. There was a lot of wars back and forth with Israel and him. Basically, the government that controls Palestine is Hamas. It always has been. It has not helped that Zionists have come in, okay, that want to protect a certain place for Israel, and then they get involved, and it's part of the UN, okay? If you get the UN involved in anything, just expect nothing but war and a mess. I mean, look at our country because of all the associations that got on board with Agenda 2030. The UN cannot, I've never seen them do anything successfully. Sorry, I just haven't. Maybe I missed it. So, Yasser Arafat. His background, though, it's like all of these people that they brought in were always people that were tied to terrorist organizations. But not just terrorist organizations, but big money. The Zionists, there was different sections of them too, confusing everything. But they felt that there should be, that the Jews, considering the history, that there should be a place for them. So here's why I think this is what makes the problem with all these terrorist organizations, okay? Is I think I've watched documentaries, as I've said, like most of my life. So I watched a documentary that had nothing to do with the policies of Palestine or Israel, but just it was on Palestine more, and how they were very good friends with most of the Jewish people, because they're like in a neighborhood. Like, even though we look at it as separate countries, they're really like they're more than neighbors. They are in the same neighborhood. It's just there's that invisible, that's your, so but the people themselves, the Jewish people and the Arab people of Palestine, they tend to be good neighbors. They're very close. They protect each other. Like, really, it's a totally different than what your mindset is from what the news tells you. Because the governments of Israel and the governments of Palestine, which is a terrorist organization, end up going at it. And then it's those people who have formed bonds and friendships and family ties. I mean, they really are, they're tight. This was a whole documentary way back in the day when that's one of the worst things they hate about all this resettlement shit, is because they lose their connections. Then they talked about this. They lose their connections with their Jewish friends because these are their neighbors. They do learn to live in peace. But you get these people through the UN, through these terrorist organizations, through corrupt Jewish people in Israel that are running the show. And then what you end up having is a bunch of innocent people on both sides suffering because of arrogant leaders that don't know their place. And all of them should remember there's a higher creator, and it's not them. Many times there's been these different resettlements, okay? And in this documentary, the people knew. They're like, yeah, these are our governments. This is what we're dealing with. Like, they know. The innocent people of Palestine and the innocent Jews know. They know their governments suck, no matter what era it is. Yeah, the news tells us this whole, story about this and that, but really, when it comes down to it, the innocent people of both of these countries would just like peace. I just don't think the leaders of either, I do know is the Israel government has never called for the extinction of all of Iran. So that's a big deal, because that is what this goes back to, is wanting to completely get rid of all of the Israelis. That is not acceptable. There's no negotiating with that. So I've lost my page about him, so I can do a little bit more. He was seen by Palestinians, many, as somebody who was a freedom fighter. However, that's when I learned about This was when Israel still was in the Gaza Strip and there were suicide bombers under him.